Making sense of the NFL after 11 weeks of football. Can anybody stop the Detroit Lions in the NFC? And who's the best in the AFC right now with the help of the DVOA mastermind himself, Aaron Schatz? All that and more coming up on today's Peacock and Williamson.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look at the NFL on the field and in the front office with elite breakdowns to next-level analysis and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL show. Brian Peacock here, rolling solo, but I do have a special guest today. Williamson out. He's doing some Steelers stuff because they've got the Thursday nighter, so changed up our schedule this week. But Aaron Schatz at A Shots NFL, you know his work because he is the creator of the DVOA statistic. I think one of the best ways to, and the best all-encompassing advanced statistics at looking at the NFL and trying to figure out what is going on in a chaotic football league. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by FanDuel. And right now you can get your start with a big return on FanDuel because new customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now let's bring on today's guest. Very excited today, joined by Aaron Schatz. He is the godfather of NFL analytics, some people say, the inventor of DVOA. Love DVOA. It's a phenomenal stat, and I always learn so much when I chat with Aaron at A Shots NFL. You can find him and all the DVOA information and so much more at FTN Fantasy, so you got to check that out. Aaron, thanks for joining us here today. A little after mid-season, kind of check in on these football teams. We talked to you preseason, and as we know in the NFL, things are chaos, and it's gone completely haywire on us.
Yeah. A lot of stuff that I expected hasn't happened, and a lot of stuff I didn't expect has happened. And it's been kind of a crazy year, but in the end, for the most part, the teams we thought would be really good are the best teams. It's sort of underneath that there's been a lot of up and down movement.
One thing I'm because every week, and I preach it, NFL's chaos. You think you know something, and the next week it gets thrown on its ear. I think we can all agree that the Detroit Lions are pretty stinking good right now. What do they look like right now historically compared to DVOA numbers and historic teams in the past that were really good?
Amazing. Detroit, after the huge win over Jacksonville, is now the third best team in DVOA history through 10 games, behind only the 2007 Patriots and the 1991 Washington Redskins. They're up there with teams like the 98 Broncos and the 1985 Bears. Like, that's how dominant they've been. They've just been like destroying most of their opponents. Like, yes, there were close games, like the Houston game was close and they lost to Tampa Bay, even though they had way more yards than the Buccaneers had. But they've just been destroying opponents and doing everything right. Offense, defense, special teams. It's all working for Detroit.
Even Jared Goff throwing 5 interceptions can't derail the Detroit Lions. It's pretty phenomenal what they're doing right now. How do they compare to last year's best teams? We talked to you last year before the Super Bowl, or before the championship games, and I think it was the Niners and the Ravens were pretty good historically as well. Do the Lions stack up even better than those two teams did last year?
Even better at this point than those two teams were last year, although those two teams were very good in the regular season. And, we're an example that being great in the regular season is not a guarantee that you'll win the Super Bowl. And the same thing goes for Detroit. This is not a guarantee that they'll win the Super Bowl, but they are phenomenal this season and just incredibly well balanced. Right now, we have them second on offense behind Baltimore, second on defense behind Minnesota, and first on special teams. That is just a ridiculous all-around performance.
Oh, that's phenomenal stuff. And we'll talk about the 49ers and where the special teams, that third unit, is ranked, and it's probably towards the bottom for you. But you mentioned a couple teams there. So the Detroit strong in the NFC right now. We'll get back to the NFC. AFC side of things. Chiefs are 9-1. It feels flimsy with some of the games, but they keep winning. Finally lost one to Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills. Is it the Bills? Is it the Chiefs? Is it the Ravens in the AFC? They've lost a number of games, and they've lost some bad football teams too. And it's the defensive side of the ball really that worries you, I think, more with the Ravens. So Talk to me about the AFC. Who's the team in the AFC this year?
The Ravens are great when they're great. They're just really inconsistent. And so that's the thing, is you don't know who's showing up each week. And so the hard thing is imagining they may have to win a wild card. Imagining them putting together one of their great performances for 4 straight weeks is kind of tough. So I do think it's going to be the Bills and the Chiefs. At the end, it does look like the Chiefs are more likely. We have the Chiefs getting home field advantage about 55% of our simulations, and the Bills about 35%. The Bills have been a little bit better, not just in this week's game, but overall they've been a little bit better than the Chiefs, but the Chiefs are still a really good team. Like when the Chiefs were 9-0, we were all like, this is not a team that's as good as you usually think of as 9-0. But they are a team that's as good as what you usually think of as 7-2, and that's pretty good. Like, it just because they're not the 2007 Patriots just blowing everybody out of the water doesn't mean they're not a good team. So I do think the AFC is most likely to come down to Kansas City, Buffalo, and the Ravens. But it's hard. It's just hard to see the Ravens being consistent enough unless they win their division to get 4 straight, including 3 on the road.
That leads me to my next question of making some sense of some teams around the NFL. This is really why I wanted to talk to you today, Aaron, because there's some teams I can't figure out. I think the Steelers are really good, and I think their ceiling got raised a little bit just with the professional quarterback play of Russell Wilson. So I like where they sit. I don't know if they're going to be with those 4 teams in the end, but they did just beat the Baltimore Ravens. So I like where they're at. And then you look at a team like the Chargers, who just flip things around so quickly. And Jim Harbaugh's 5 for 5 turning around programs, whether it's in the NFL or in college football. And those pesky Denver Broncos, who are getting better and better quarterback play from rookie Bo Nix every single week. I've been trying to fade the Broncos all season long, but I guess you can't ignore them anymore.
Yeah, we have the Chargers 9th and the Broncos 10th. So there's a gap between those other teams and those two. In Pittsburgh, we have Pittsburgh 13th. There's a gap there, but it's not a huge gap. It's not like out of the realm of possibility to imagine those teams going on a run in the playoffs, especially if the Steelers win their division and get home games. The Steelers are interesting. I did some analysis about a week ago about coaches who consistently outperform the underlying statistics. And Mike Tomlin is a big one, right? His teams consistently outperform what DVOA says they should be doing. And by the way, other advanced metrics as well. This is not a problem with DVOA. All the advanced metrics. Tomlin outperforms what the Steelers come out as. And so it's like the Steelers are not as good as these other teams underlying, but Tomlin does something. The way he manages the game and manages the personnel, that they win more games than you would expect. So they're definitely in the mix.
Good. So what I'm hearing from you is that the Steelers are overrated. So when Williamson comes back to the program, I can let him know what you said about.
Well, they're sort of overrated, and yet at the same time a little underrated because you may not correctly account for the coaching.
Mm-hmm. There's a coach in the NFC that's getting a lot of fingers pointed at him. He can't win the Super Bowl. And it might be the opposite of that. They keep losing close games. And I'm talking about the team I covered the closest. That's the San Francisco 49ers. And there's a lot of teams that I can't make sense of in the NFC West. And it's seeming more and more likely that you got to win the West, and only one team's getting out of the West in the NFC because teams are getting so far behind. And the Niners have lost all these NFC games. They've lost the 3 of their 4 against the division opponents. They've had fourth quarter leads in all 3 of those games. And so if you want to talk about a team that's underperforming, and right now a head coach getting a lot of fingers pointed at him and Kyle Shanahan, it's the San Francisco 49ers.
Yep. And that same analysis that I did showed that every single year that he has been head coach of the 49ers have underperformed what you would expect from the underlying statistics. Every single year, he may have the worst track record of any current coach as far as underperforming the underlying statistics. And that's not to say he's not a great coach at obviously when it comes to scheming and game preparation, that offense is fantastic. And what he's able to do with different quarterbacks has been great. But the in-game management is really a problem. And you're seeing it this year. And we only have the 49ers with something like a 26% chance to make the playoffs. Their schedule is tough. They've got to play the Packers, the Bills. They still have to play the Lions. We have the Cardinals at something like 60% to win the division at this point. Like that one game lead, plus they've been a little bit better than the Rams and a little bit better than the Seahawks. The 49ers have been very good. The 49ers are still 6th in DVOA, even though they haven't had Christian McCaffrey for most of the year. But the way that they underperform is a little weird. And the fact is that because of that, and because they're a game behind Arizona now and their schedule is harder, it's looking pretty likely they're going to miss it.
There's that week 18 game against the Arizona Cardinals, which will be very interesting. And if the 49ers can keep it interesting, that is. Looking at the 49ers team and the NFC West, FanDuel, our great sponsor, that's flipped. The Cardinals are the favorite now to win the division, as they probably should be at this point in the season. And until this last week, with that loss to the Seahawks, I felt like the 49ers were still they'll flip the switch. They'll go on a run. They've done it multiple years, especially in November. It just feels like with this team, it's not happening this year. And we talked about the third phase a minute ago. How much does special teams affect your DVO rankings? How much does that affect the game? Because the 49ers clearly aren't good there, but we've seen teams that are bad on special teams go deep into the playoffs before. And
it's bad. It's bad, but the worst special teams is usually about a third as bad as the worst defense and like a fourth as bad as the worst offense. So in general, if you look at the ranges of ratings, a football team is about 4 parts offense, 3 parts defense, and 1 part special teams. The other thing I would point out is the 49ers do not have the worst special teams in the league because the Tennessee Titans have been so absolutely horrendous on punt coverage that they have by far the worst special teams in the league this year because they cannot cover punts at all. But the 49ers are next to last.
More with Aaron Schatz coming up. We try to answer the question, if it's not going to be the 49ers, who is that team in the NFC this year that could knock off those powerhouse Detroit Lions? Next. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson brought to you by Z-Biotics. Pre-alcohol probiotic drink by Z-Biotics is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make Z-Biotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly and then feel your best tomorrow. It is that easy. And every time I have pre-alcohol before I drink, I notice a huge difference the next day. Even after a night out, I can confidently plan on whatever podcast, whatever work I have to do the next day without worry. You drink pre-alcohol, best results, first drink of the night, pace yourself, hydrate, don't go insane, right? And then enjoy tomorrow. It is that simple. So go to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use LockedOnNFL at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with 100% money back guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money. No questions asked. Remember, head to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL at checkout for 15% off. The next segment of today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is sponsored by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And you can find all of the action in the NFL and get a big return because right now new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you think you get an advantage, when you think you get a little hunch, maybe in the middle of the game, and maybe you just want to check out some stats first, the latest stats, play-by-play, and so much more, you can find all that information on the very same page where you place your bets at FanDuel.com. So join today or download the app, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports book partner of the NFL. Staying in the NFC West for a minute. Rams and Seahawks, they're not good, right? Especially the Rams. The Rams had that hiccup. It's like, oh, they got Cooper Kupp back. It's like,
They're fine.
I couldn't believe that they were going to be like, oh, watch out for the Rams. And they're not terrible football teams, but they're just kind of mid, as the kids say.
Yeah, they are. They're very mid. We have the Seahawks 17. We have the Rams 18. Now, the Rams are a little higher than that with Nakua and Kupp healthy. But yeah, those teams are very mid. They're not as good as the 49ers should be, and they're not as good as the Arizona Cardinals have been. So they're not bad teams. They're just, pretty mid.
And are the Cardinals for real then? Because they've obviously been playing better on defense than I thought based on their personnel. Is this a team that you can project is going to keep this up the rest of the way? How do you like the Cardinals right now?
Yeah, their defense is now above average for the year, which is kind of nuts. Like they've been basically 14th in everything except for passing, right? Where Kyler Murray is really playing very, very well. Everything else has been kind of like 14th, like the running game and the defense and the special teams. But right now, that's good enough. Like that is good enough to win that division right now because they have an easier remaining schedule than the 49ers and the one-game lead on them. So, I mean, and given the way Kyler Murray is playing, I would absolutely not put it past the Cardinals to win a game or two in the playoffs. I don't think they're a real Super Bowl contender. Unless, this is one of those years where some team just goes on a crazy run. But we haven't really had those years recently. From about 2006 to about 2012, there were a lot of lower-rated teams that went on crazy runs in the playoffs. We haven't really had that the last few years. You've basically had to be a top 5, top 6 team to go to the Super Bowl for the last few years. And my guess is that the same will be this year. You'll need to be a top 5, top 6 team to go to the Super Bowl, which basically means Philly and Detroit and maybe Minnesota. And then in the AFC, Buffalo, Baltimore, and Kansas City.
The Atlanta Falcons have not been good on defense. The pass rush has been rough. Is this a one-and-done team in the playoffs? Because, again, West looks like one team's coming out. The South looks like one team's coming out. Can a team like the Falcons do any damage here?
Yeah, we have them 19th. The Falcons are the only team with a winning record that's below any team with a losing record in DVOA. And I do think that they look like a one-and-done team. I would imagine Minnesota or Green Bay or Washington would go into Atlanta and be favored in the playoffs,
The Commanders are fascinating to me. Clearly, actually, let's say in the South real quick before we get to the Commanders. The Saints aren't going to go into the playoffs, I don't think. But the Saints were the one team you were really high on in the preseason, and I was a little bit shocked by it. And they came out hot, and I was like, gosh dang it, Aaron Schatz had them nailed. And then they just lost brutally.
They lost a game where they outplayed the Falcons significantly and lost anyway. And then Carr got hurt. And Shaheed got hurt, and Olave got hurt, and now they're a wreck.
But
it looked good for a while there, but they had way too many injuries to really be competitive.
They've won a couple games though recently. Could they? Are they like a spoiler at this point potentially? Then
it's really hard to imagine them climbing from 4-7 back into the playoffs without Shaheed and without Olave and the defensive, like the older defensive players like Cameron Jordan and Demario Davis have declined a little bit this year, and now there's no Marshawn Lattimore anymore. So I can't imagine the Saints are going to climb back into the playoff picture.
So similar to the Cardinals, there's a Washington Commanders team that has been really good, and they're a team that you thought was a year away or maybe 2 years away, and all of a sudden it's like, nope, we're going to be really good right away with our rookie quarterback. And they lost a couple games recently. They lost to the Steelers in a close game, still competitive. Is this a team you expect to kind of fade down the stretch because they're not quite ready for prime time? Or are the Washington Commanders, as you just mentioned, maybe a team that's going to go win a game even on the road in the playoffs?
Yeah, I think that they're good. I like them better than the Falcons. They're similar to the Falcons, but better. We have them 6th on offense, whereas we have the Falcons 11th. So Washington is, I think, definitely could get the 5 and go to Atlanta and win. Or even go to Arizona and win. If, Arizona is the 3 and they get the 6, they could totally do that. But again, I don't think they're good enough to be considered a serious Super Bowl contender. But it's definitely not out of the realm of possibility that they go on the road And I mean, they could win the division too. At this point, it's about 75% Eagles, 25% Commanders. But those teams, when they play again, it is in Washington.
So last one for you. And at A Shots NFL, at FTN Fantasy, you can find all the DVOA stuff, fantastic articles, fantasy information, all at FTN Fantasy. I want you to put your name on this one, Aaron. This is important. Talked about how good the Lions are. Who's the second best team in the NFC? Is it the Eagles? Is it the Packers? Is it the Vikings? Who is the number 2 team in the NFC? Who's the team the Lions are going to have to watch their back for in the playoffs?
DVOA would say it's Minnesota. But given that offense is more consistent and predictive than defense, I think I would go with Philadelphia because they're the likely 2 seed. That is probably the team that Detroit is going to have to beat in the NFC Championship game. That's the most likely team to make the Super Bowl in the NFC other than Detroit is Philadelphia.
Just to make me sleep better at night, the Chiefs aren't just going to kind of roll into the playoffs and go 3-peat on us, are they? Can we get a new team that hoists the Lombardi this year?
The team that I keep comparing the Chiefs to is the 1990 49ers. That team was also coming off 2 straight titles, and they were not as impressive as you would expect, but they started 10-0 anyway. And they did eventually lose a couple games and then lose in the playoffs to a better Giants team.
The Roger Craig fumble.
So 15-13 is not like a huge loss, but close wins taketh, and close wins, the goddess of close wins is a fickle mistress.
Right. Yeah.
And you can definitely see a situation where the Chiefs' incredible run on the close games runs out against Buffalo or Baltimore in the playoffs.
I take that back. One more team I wanted to ask you about that I want you to help me make sense of in the AFC is a team that, they're going to be a playoff team, and that's the Houston Texans. But how good are they?
Yeah, the offense has really underperformed, although, they do have Nico Collins back now, so you think things should be better. What's remarkable about the Texans is that their defense has been so good, and that their offensive line, the interior especially of that offensive line, has declined so much from last year. Like if you look at the ESPN pass block win rates, it's like the same guys for the most part as last year, but like Shaq Mason is way worse and Juice Scruggs is way worse than they were last year. Why? I don't know why, but it's not just Kenyon Green at left guard was terrible and therefore everything was off. Like everybody declined, especially Mason and Scruggs, and I have no explanation for why that happened. But Houston will make the playoffs, and their defense is really good, and they're going to probably win that division. They could be upset in the first round, but they could win in the first round. But their offense is just not good enough to be a serious Super Bowl contender this year.
Right. And you just got to lean on CJ Stroud in the passing game so much with a healthy Nico Collins. That helps, but they've just really not been able to run the ball at all in this new regime. A few weeks it's looked.
Yeah, even Mixon, 3 touchdowns this week, but the efficiency was not. He had 3 touchdowns because they were close to the end zone most of the time. Like the overall efficiency was not good of the running game.
So there we go. There's some things we know. Chaos has ensued this season, but some teams that I think we can hang our hats on to be really good and being in it in the end. And can't wait to watch how this thing ends up down the stretch. And of course, you can find all of that information and a whole lot more. Fantastic resource for football fans, fantasy football players alike at FTN Fantasy. You can find Aaron at A Shots NFL on Twitter. And Aaron, always a pleasure chatting with you. Appreciate it so much. We might have to do it again in the playoffs.
Thank you very much. I'm also on Blue Sky now. Like a lot of people, I've moved over. So Blue Sky, A Shots on Blue Sky.
There we go. The final segment of today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is sponsored by Built Rewards. Listen up, renters. Ever feel like you're stuck in this loop of rent payments, just watching your money vanish into thin air? It's time to turn that rent game around and start earning some serious rewards. That's where Built Rewards comes in. Built is breaking ground as a neighborhood rewards program that hooks you up with points on your rent every month. Pay your rent and watch the Built points roll in. What do you do with Built points? Well, you use them to jet off on a dream vacation. Put your points toward a flight or hotel stay with 500 plus airlines and 700,000 plus hotels and properties. You can also use your points to book fitness studio classes, redeem them toward a future rent payment. They're designed to meet your lifestyle. So pay rent hassle-free through the Built Rewards app, and your rent game just got a major upgrade. Earn points by paying rent now when you go to joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNFL. That's joinbuilt, joinbilt.com/LockedOnNFL. Make sure you use our URL so they know we sent you. Joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNFL to start earning points with your rent payments today. Phenomenal stuff there from Aaron Schatz. You got to check out the DVOA stuff at FTN Fantasy, and it's just a great stat. I love the DVOA. It tends to be a pretty sticky statistic versus some others, and it's all encompassing. And for those of you who don't know much about DVOA, I don't want to spend time with Aaron explaining it, but here's the ultra short version from the FTN website about what DVOA is. DVOA measures a team's efficiency by comparing success on every single play to a league average based on situation and opponent. And they use the example of a 3-yard run. A 3-yard run on 2nd and 15 is not as valuable as a 3-yard run on 3rd and 2, right? You're playing against a different defense that's trying to stop a different thing. You're playing against maybe a different team. Like, what defense are you doing this run against? And so, that's every play throughout the NFL season, and it's all measured. And it's just, DVOA is simply a method of evaluating teams, units, or players, and it takes every single play during the NFL season and compares each one to a league average baseline based on situation. So DVOA, by the way, if you look at the stat and you see the numbers and you see, okay, what is 10%? What is minus 20%? DVOA and value over average is what it stands for. DVOA is a percentage. So a team with a DVOA on offense of 10% is 10% better than the average team. And a quarterback with a DVOA of minus 20% is 20% worse than the average quarterback. And so DVOA measures scoring. Defenses are better when they are on the negative side. Offenses is better when they're on the positive side. And so every year is normalized. So the average that year is 0%. So whatever percent you are above or below 0% plus or minus of whether it's offense or defense is how you decipher what the DVOA numbers mean there. And the Lions, it checks out. The Lions are a phenomenal football team this year. They're bordering on scary. And you might say, okay, well, whatever, 52-6. Of course, the Lions beat the brakes off the Jaguars because that's one of the best teams, if not the best team in the NFL, going against one of the worst, if not the worst team in the NFL. And I believe the Jacksonville Jaguars would have the number 1 pick in the NFL draft if the season ended today. Season does not end today. So can the juggernaut Lions keep this up? They've won 8 straight. Will they be this same team playing at this level when we get deep into January? If they get into February and they're representing the NFC in the Super Bowl, a lot of that has to play out. You don't give people the trophy in November. But man, when you are supposed to beat a team and you give them no shot, I think that's what's really important here, because there's so much parity in the NFL. And when the Lions can beat you with power, when they can beat you with finesse, when they keep stopping you and then they keep scoring on offense and just step on the neck of a team that they're much better than, that's what really scares you, because it's not they don't let teams hang around. They don't let teams in it if they're better than you. And that's how the Detroit Lions are playing right now, especially. And if you ask today, they're clearly number 1 on my power rankings. And they'll probably be number 1 on most teams' power rankings. And they've been playing phenomenal football. They've got the best point differential in the NFL, plus 159 points, which is far and away the best. I think there's only 2 teams that are in triple digits as far as scoring that much more than their opponents over the course of 11 weeks. And the other is the Buffalo Bills, who are at 106. So they're 53 points ahead of the Buffalo Bills, who are number 2 as far as point differential. So they're lapping the league at this point with how good the Detroit Lions are playing, and in the best division in the NFL right now too, in the NFC North. So yeah, they're a phenomenal football team, and it's really, with the way they're playing right now, the confidence they have, they're even better than they were last year when they fell just short and couldn't finish off the 49ers, even though they started hot against the Niners in the NFC Championship game. This is looking like their year, if there has ever been their year for the Detroit Lions. And In my lifetime. It's been rare to see that. In fact, it's the first time I've ever said that in my lifetime. So good on the Detroit Lions, and Lions fans, I'm sure, pumped for that football team right now. And yeah, they are number one in DVOA, number one in your hearts, the Detroit Lions. Look out for the Buffalo Bills, though, right now. I mentioned how they're plus 106 point differential on the season. They've won 6 straight now. They just knocked off the nemesis Kansas City Chiefs, and I think that was an important win for them. And I mean, they're 5 games up on the Dolphins. The Dolphins are 4-6, and they're in second place in the AFC East. And the Buffalo Bills could just kneel on it the rest of the way. But so you hope they don't get cold because things aren't competitive for them in the division. They have some competitive games, though, to help hone them and keep their sword sharp as they get ready for the playoffs. They just beat the Kansas City Chiefs. They got the Niners coming up. They got some other, better football teams than those teams in the AFC East to compete with. And the Miami Dolphins are a better team right now today than they were a few weeks ago, too, I believe, even though this is not clearly the Miami Dolphins year. But the Buffalo Bills, I would probably put 2 right now, not just because of their record, but they just knocked off the Chiefs, and the Baltimore Ravens lost 4 games this year. And which Ravens team shows up week to week? I don't know. And the Steelers are just super consistent right now. They're playing some really good football. Aaron doesn't quite like them as much as, the Ravens and the Bills and the Chiefs in the AFC in the end. But I think those are the teams we're talking about. And then it's the Texans that I can't figure out. And look, I don't know if the Chargers, they have a good shot of making it in the playoffs. Can the Colts squeak in there? Probably not. The Broncos, I don't think you're worried about those teams at all in the AFC once it gets to January. The Texans are the interesting team because they can play because of how good they are on defense, because you got a star quarterback. They're a team that can go beat you. And I don't think we've seen that type of team yet from them this year. They've been good. They've not been great. Can they get there? And they stepped on the neck of a bad team like the Lions did this week on Monday Night Football. And I don't have, many big takeaways from the 34-10 win for the Houston Texans over the Dallas Cowboys on Monday Night Football, except for that the Texans are a much better football team and they handled their business there. Love seeing Nico Collins back, and you forget how big and fast he is. I mean, he's a difference-making player for a team like that. But this game was never close. Houston went up 14-0 and kind of coasted to victory, even though the Cowboys did put a couple scores on the board, and were able to make a big play with Kevontae Turpin, fastest ball carrier in the NFL this year, on his 64-yard touchdown. But man, CeeDee Lamb, they're just peppering him with targets. It's just difficult for the Cowboys to do anything right now. 0 running game. They're not the same team they've been in recent years on the defensive side of the ball. And they're just like, they just seem like a collection of football players right now on defense, really, and less of a football team. And I would love to see Trey Lance, just because, it's more interesting, I think, than Cooper Rush. And Cooper Rush was, when you have to throw it 55 times and you're behind and you're worse than the team across from you, that's tough. So I thought Cooper Rush was actually good and fine in this football game. Touchdown and an interception, 354 passing yards when you chuck it 55 times, but he wasn't a disaster. He wasn't the reason the Cowboys lost this game. So it's not like you're going to go to Trey Lance because of, and we're going to win games now because Cooper Rush is so awful. Cooper Rush is, classic, solid backup quarterback in the NFL. It's just, what is Trey Lance? Is he just awful? He's more interesting. So that's just what I want to see. And just for the young man, Trey Lance, he needs to play more football. So I would like to see that to be more entertaining. I would click on and watch a Cowboys game if Trey Lance was at quarterback, whether it goes good or bad. And if it's the Cooper Rush Cowboys, I just won't turn on the game, really. And the only reason I watch this game is it was in prime time, is because it's my job to watch this football game, right? But the Houston Texans cruising to victory. Joe Mixon's numbers look good, and there's been a few games where he's looked okay. And look, Joe Mixon's been the only running back that has looked decent, and given the Texans any semblance of a running game for the last 2 years in this DeMeco Ryans era. So it's something they're going to have to figure out, and they're going to have to get it cleaned up front with the offensive line. Stroud hasn't put up the numbers that he put up last year, but he's still a really good quarterback. And with Nico Collins back, I do like the Houston Texans, and they've got time to really solidify themselves. But there's just something been lacking with that Houston Texans team at 7-4 that there's no way I would put them in my power rankings ahead of another 7-4 team in the AFC like the Baltimore Ravens. So I think there's still a little bit of a gap there between a team like the Ravens and the Texans, even though both teams right now are 7-4, and the Texans are coming off the win, and the Ravens are coming off a loss against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And yeah, NFC. It's the Lions, man. It's the Lions right now. Can the Niners get something figured out? Because I think talent-wise, and we've seen what they've done with runs in the past, they look like a team that is not going to flip on that switch, even though I've just every week, the Niners will flip on the switch. We've seen it too many times, and they're too talented not to. They haven't done it. And if, Bosa is going to be out for them, the rest of the NFC West, the Cardinals, I think it's clear that we can believe in the Cardinals and the Commanders as good teams right now. Are they great teams? Are they going to go win a bunch of games in January? I don't know. I don't know if I would favor them over a team like the 49ers next week. I wouldn't favor them necessarily over the Philadelphia Eagles. And we just saw the Commanders and Eagles, and we saw the Eagles handle the Commanders. So I think those teams are still not quite ready to go. So it's going to be up to the NFC North. It's going to be up to the Packers. It's going to be up to the Vikings, probably more so the Packers than the Vikings, I think, to try to make things difficult for the Detroit Lions this year, and those Philadelphia Eagles in the East, who have looked a lot better, especially recently too. So the Detroit Lions, man, they're a beast of a football team, and that's where we're at after 11 weeks of the NFL season. Thanks again to Aaron Schatz for joining me here on the Peacock and Williamson NFL show. Williamson had some extra responsibilities this week with the Pittsburgh Steelers playing Thursday night, so I was running this one solo without Williamson. He'll be back with me tomorrow, though, and we'll get into the mailbag questions as well. Hit me up at BD Peacock, at Williamson NFL. Drop a question on the YouTube comments for our mailbag this week, and of course, we'll be making picks for Week 12 back with Williamson tomorrow, right here, Peacock and Williamson.